Should the ACC get rid of divisions? We'll talk all about that and more on today's Locked On Boston College.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Boston College. I am your host, AJ Black. Thank you all for listening. On today's show, we're going to talk all about the ACC. We'll look at divisions and what my thoughts are after some news out of the Big 12. And we'll get into everything else that happened this weekend. Before we jump in, I need to apologize. I have a cold. I've had one all week. And when I get a cold, it really screws with my voice. So you'll hear me squeaking and squawking a little bit here. I'm going to try to make it as pleasant to listen to as possible and take breaks and drink tea and things like that so that you don't have to listen to me screech. But anyways, over the weekend, the Big Ten said that they might get rid of their divisions and play more of a combined schedule where they can play anyone in the top two teams would make the championship game. So with that being said, that's the first I've heard of a conference saying that they're going to do that. Now, NCAA has said that they can't do that, that you have to be able to have conferences and things like that with divisions. But there are waivers that they can do. And as we saw in 2020, conferences without divisions are a positive thing. Now, should the ACC do this? Should the ACC be the next conference to discuss getting rid of divisions? Oh my gosh, yes. It is time to get rid of these divisions because 2020 was the perfect example of what college football could be like. You remember that schedule that Boston College had? We were scheduled against Duke, UVA, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, and I think there was another Pitt, excuse me. Played a bunch of coastal teams. You did not have Florida State on the schedule. You did not have NC State or Wake Forest. But you get those games that you don't usually get. Now, with the current model in the ACC, I believe it's once every 13 years you get a certain school at home. So like Miami, more recently hasn't had a huge rivalry with Boston College. But, I mean, you only have to look back to Doug Flutie to remember how big their rivalry was at one point. And the Ed Reed game to give them the benefit of the doubt in at least one game. So you only get Miami at home once every 13 years. Ridiculous, right? And instead we get, NC State, who BC really doesn't have much of a rivalry with, every other year. You get Clemson, a team that is, unfairly, you can say what you will about the Atlantic, BC gets them away every other year. So I would love to see the Atlantic and coastal divisions just go away. I think it would get more interesting options. If you get teams here more, you could sell more tickets because, how interesting is a Wake Forest home game for Boston College fans? It's not. But if you got, Pitt here, if you got Miami here more often, even some of these other schools, Georgia Tech, it freshens things up. It doesn't make the schedule seem like the same thing every year, -4 out of conference games. I love it. I think it's the best idea, and it gets rid of the unfairness of the Atlantic versus the coastal. How many conference years have we had where the ACC championship game should be between two Atlantic teams because the coastal's a mess, right? Last year, because of the lack of conference divisions, you were able to get a championship game between two teams that were repeating a game they already played earlier this year, Notre Dame and Clemson. That was fun. That allowed for a better product on the field. That allowed for ACC fans to see a better game. Instead of seeing, Clemson versus, an 8-4 Pitt team, you saw two playoff caliber teams in the playoffs, in the championship game. That would be a huge win. So Jim Phillips, I know, is looking at all these different things, and I know this new alliance or whatever, which seems to be a whole lot of nothing at this point, though I'm hearing buzz that like the Pac-12 is already starting to look at some things, and so they'll get there. But Phillips, he needs to start looking at, ways to spruce up the ACC, ways to, re-envision how this conference works, because, you want to have the two best teams in the conference championship. It helps the conference. And maybe some years that'll be, Florida State and Clemson. But as long as they're still in the Atlantic, one team will make the championship, the other won't. And you could get another conference, the other division, you could have another team that doesn't deserve it as much. So I hope this comes along. I hope that Phillips takes the lead of the Big Ten, that he starts to develop some ideas like this that say, hey, I love to see our teams play each other more often in football, because right now, there's fan bases that haven't seen another school in like over a decade, and that's ridiculous. So hopefully that this will be the first step in that situation. So that's just a thought. It was an interesting thing, and I've always been against conferences, and you could do it where you could just have all 14 teams in one conference and they just kind of go at it. You could do pods. You could do a million different ways of looking at it other than conferences. But we'll have to see if they actually do it, because I really haven't heard anything from the ACC. But if the Big Ten does it and maybe the Pac-12 considers it, the alliance is there, maybe they'll all start to do it. So we'll have to wait and see. In a moment, I'm going to get into the news of the weekend. And then on our final segment, we'll talk about BC basketball's game against Pitt. Hey Eagles fans, this is AJ Black with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about. GetUpside. My listeners are earning cash back for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free GetUpside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first cash back fill up. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using GetUpside. Just download the app for free and use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a year in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or e-gift card from Amazon or other brands. Just download the free GetUpside app and use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. That's code SCORE. Locked on Boston College, AJ Black here. Now, we're going to go over some news items, and then in our final segment, we're going to talk about the Pitt game. But let's just jump into what happened over the weekend for BC sports. On Friday night, Boston College traveled to Orono, Maine to play the Maine Black Bears and lost 4-2. I don't know what else to say about this hockey team. It's one of the most depressing stories in Boston College recent history, as this team is bad. Like, they're not playing well. They're losing against teams like Maine. Maine is in dead last place in the Hockey East. They are in last, and Boston College just lost to them. As I said before, this was a must-win game. Boston College came out, lukewarm and got blown out. It was a terrible game. I don't know what else to say about this hockey team. They're playing poorly. They're about to lose all their other stars to the Olympics. They're going to play even worse. And it is going to be a really black eye type of year for BC hockey. You're going to have to move on past it, figure out what happened, dissect it, and move on, because right now they're in danger of falling in last place. Right now, if hockey's tournament time started, they're traveling, and as they should. They're not playing well. They're under 500 in the Hockey East. Bad game, and they're just playing poorly. They're going to have Harvard on Tuesday. We'll see if they can figure out something there. This weekend at different various postseason bowl games, we had Mitch Wolf on last week to talk about his previews. They had the Shrine Bowl and the NFLPA Bowl, and just some quick little notes there. Trey Barry, as Mitch said, had great measurements. He didn't play all that much in the bowl game, but as Mitch said, those bowl games aren't the reason why these kids head down there. It's to do the practices. So we don't know what the practices looked like for Barry, because we didn't, I don't have the staff to send to a Shrine Bowl, but he didn't really do all that much. He mostly was in there for blocking, didn't have any catches, so it was a quiet game for Barry. And then in the so that was the NFLPA Bowl, and then in the Shrine Bowl we had Brandon Sebastian, and I just saw pop up as I was writing this. Josh Carney of the USA Today Network said that he looked good with on some deep routes. He's showing through, really playing well for Brandon Sebastian. So he's a guy that I love to see where he ends up. I know Mitch has his thoughts on, if he's a 6th or 7th round kind of guy. But Sebastian always had some good plays with BC, so let's see what he turns into in the NFL. So over the weekend, Robert Harris, he goes by Joker. I briefly talked about this. He seems to be one of the last guys Boston College could be landing for their class of 2022 class. He is a current Western Kentucky commit. He goes to Coral Gables, Florida. And of course, they bring him up here in the middle of one of the biggest snowstorms in Boston history. I saw his coach tweet out that he was excited to see snow, but man, hopefully he doesn't mind it, because that was a big one. It made me think of, I just saw also this weekend, Davion Crouch, who's also a Florida kid, who's just up here to start his summer, spring football. He tweeted out, "Man, this snow's is killing me here," or something like that. "I'm a Florida boy." Sorry, the wording of it, I got it right in front of me. "Sheesh, Boston, this weather has to chill. I'm from Florida," with a crying face. So you can see kids from some of the other warmer climates are struggling a little bit with the Boston weather. And because this is my podcast and I get the chance to talk about what I want to sometimes, it sounds like Tom Brady is finally going to retire. Can I tie this into Boston College? I mean, technically, no. I mean, he did practice in the bubble in the new field house at one point during the pandemic. I saw there's some videos out there. Joe Sullivan tweeted out one of them. Just as a Boston sports fan, it kind of helps you realize the differences between where professional sports are and college sports around this area. With Brady, he brought college, he was part of, and I'm sure fans that aren't from New England are sick of it, like that renaissance of Boston sports. Remember, Boston is an area where in about 20 years where they weren't winning anything. Like you had to go back to the mid 80s when the Celtics were winning. Then all of a sudden you had David Ortiz, who just made the Hall of Fame, Tom Brady, you had Zdeno Chara and the Bruins team, and Paul Pierce. So there was this huge era, and obviously Ortiz and Brady were the big ones, right? They brought multiple championships and made they're two legends already. But the attention that that he brought to the Patriots, that made them the marquee team in the state, made it harder for a team like Boston College that was kind of at that point. I mean, look back to all the time that Brady was here. He came in 2001. That was back in the Tom O'Brien years. Same year, I think he probably was there the year that with the Patriots, the same year that Ed Reed picked off Brian St. Pierre. But he goes through 20 years of Boston sports, and he really revolutionized and made this town and solidified them as a pro sports town. I mean, they were forever anyways, but right now with this with such interest in college sports from around the country, Boston still remains a professional sports town. And to BC's credit, they've done some nice things to get attention, whether it's, the Red Sox nights for the baseball team, or, they've had different Patriots players come by, or whatever it is to keep the interest. And I know Belichick is close with Boston College at different times. So you get all these different things, but you look back at what Brady did to this area, what kind of standard he put for what sports should be like in Boston. And it's crazy, because when you're a Bostonian and you're watching a 14-2 Patriots team, on the verge of their 5th Super Bowl in like 7 years or whatever it was, versus a BC team where you're like, yeah, they're going to get smoked again because they're playing Clemson. It just kind of shows you where this town kind of puts its priorities. And it's one of those major battles that the school's going to have to continue to face. Like, you go to Auburn or Alabama, there's no pro sports they're battling with. They're just battling with themselves. And that makes it such an attractive commodity for the people down there. BC's going to have to figure out a way to make themselves a good program, and they've started to build some infrastructure. You still want to build up on Alumni Stadium and get, if Hafley's the guy, if he ends up figuring out this this team, and Earl Grant figures out the basketball team, then you'll get people back. But you need to start winning some big games. And I mean, look at both programs. When's the last real big game basketball or football has won? It's been 8 years. I mean, BC hasn't beaten a top 25 team in football since 2014. In basketball, they do it but then they mix it with getting their butt kicked by everyone else. So it's a culture thing, and I'm speaking to the choir here. When I hear Brady, I understand why some people are just not in this area, just not interested in BC sports. And it stinks, but that's where it is. Now, in a moment, we're going to talk about basketball, both women's and men's. So check that out. It's a new year and a new you. And that means New Year's resolutions. And if your goal is to make yourself healthier, make sure Built Bar is part of your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good you'll want to eat it. Unlike other protein bars, which can be chalky or waxy, Built Bar is delicious. They're 100% covered in chocolate, and they don't taste like you're eating a protein bar. They really do taste like you're having a special treat. Now, when you're doing your deals, when you're doing your making your New Year's resolution, make Built Bar part of it because some of the flavors they have are just amazing. Coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, raspberry cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and many more. In fact, Built Bar is always coming out with new limited time flavors, so you need to check out Built.com often to see what's new. Now, go over to Built.com and make sure to use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off at Built.com. This is Locked On Boston College. AJ Black here again. Apologize for the cold. My voice is really messed up at this point. But it's later in the night, and Boston College basketball has defeated Pittsburgh. Big game, big win. And the big part of this game that really stood out for me was that Boston College was able to shut down John Hugley, who had 32 points against them last time, to just 9 points. And he was 3 of 10 from shooting. Really shows what Boston College was able to do in terms of making adjustments from that last game. It shows what Grant is able to do, what this team can change, that even with, you would think after that last loss, okay, Hugley's way more talented than anything that Boston College has on their roster. And you know what? You may be right. He may be, but they figured out a scheme today to shut him down. And this wasn't even really that close of a game. Boston College had a lead of about 15 or 16 points at one point. They just really put this game away. The Langford brothers were incredible. Mekhi Ashton Langford led the team with 21 points, while DeMar Langford had 17 as well. They shot 44%, which is, again, you want to see BC shooting well when they're in these games. So, where does this leave Boston College? They are 9-11. They have 4 ACC wins, which is the same that Jim Christian had his first year with Boston College, but they have 11 more games to go. Jim Christian topped out at 7 wins with Boston College in the ACC during his tenure at Boston College. And that was the year that they went to the NIT. I believe that was 2017-18. Grant could do that in his first year. You look at what Boston College has left on their schedule. You look at who they're playing against. It's possible. They're playing a UVA team that's 12-9 next. And that's it. It's at Virginia, but winnable game. If Virginia wants to go and muck it up, Boston College can be there right with them because they're a team that can do that. Syracuse is playing terribly. Then they get Duke. Oh, good luck with that one. That's gonna be tough. Notre Dame again, playing better, but Syracuse, NC State, and Clemson, and then end the season with Georgia Tech. There's like 4 or 5 more wins in there if they play really well. You could see this team ending up this season with 8 ACC wins or 9 ACC wins. What kind of message does that send to recruits, to the fan base? If Earl Grant takes a team that won, 1 ACC game last year, 2 ACC games, and wins 8 or 9 in his first year, that is a heck of a message, and that's showing already that we're starting to see the pieces of what he's putting together. And as I've said before, is it perfect yet? Is it 100% that this is going to actually work? No. I mean, Jim Christian, again, he had 4 wins his first season. They could go out and lose the rest of these, and we're still in the same spot. But you get the feeling there's something different. You watch them play defense. You watch the intensity of how they cover, how they do the little things, and it's very different than what Jim Christian did. Very, very different. And you look at some of the other things that are popping up. Now you're seeing Gianni Thompson. He played 16 minutes, had six buckets and 3 rebounds. When you're getting your youth in, and you're building your bench, and you're adding to your team. You're not subtracting. You're not losing from injuries. You're adding to it. That's a positive sign. That's showing that your team is heading in the right direction. So, to keep this brief, because I'm sure you don't want to hear my voice for 25 plus minutes. That was the BC basketball game. BC women's, not a good game against Notre Dame. We'll talk more about that later. They were not. That's two tough losses in a row against Georgia Tech and Notre Dame, where they got really put back to earth. But we'll talk about that later. But the bigger news, and I had no intention of talking about this, but I'm not going to re-record because, again, listen to my voice. I can't do another whole show right now. Boston College apparently has a front runner for their offensive coordinator position. Pete Thamel, now of ESPN, reported that John McNulty, Notre Dame's tight end coach, is the front runner to get that job. Now, if you're not familiar with McNulty, he was a former Rutgers offensive coordinator. He has multiple years of experience in the NFL with the Tennessee Titans, with the Tampa Bay Bucks, where he met Jeff Hafley. He worked with the Los Angeles/San Diego Chargers and the Arizona Cardinals. Well, he has a good resume. He's a tight ends coach. From what I heard, I talked to Brian Driscoll of Irish Breakdown, part of the SI network as well. I do BC Bulletin, he does SI, Fighting Irish, excuse me. He said that Tommy Rees, the Notre Dame offensive coordinator, really holds him in high regard and says that he really respects his opinion. So he's a guy that in the Notre Dame system is really someone they look after. Now he's got the time at Rutgers. He also was an offensive analyst for Penn State and now has been with Notre Dame. Is this a home run hire? Probably not. I mean, there's bigger names out there. I mean, he had a lot of success at Rutgers. His first go-around at Rutgers, he had a top 35 offense 2 years in a row with under Greg Schiano. That was when Rutgers was really good. Now, you may go back to, he came back to Rutgers. And yes, he came back the year Boston College played Rutgers under Chris Ash. And that team was awful, and he didn't do much with that. But again, that was because Rutgers, at that point, had completely fallen into the toilet. They were not the same Rutgers that we saw 10 years ago. They were new to the Big Ten. They were, they had a couple bad coaches in a row, and it just wasn't working out. So McNulty goes in there, tries to fix things, doesn't work immediately, and he's got him a job. Now, will he work at Boston College? He's a Pennsylvania guy, so hopefully Phil likes him, Phil Jakovic. He's going to be the new quarterbacks coach to go along with it if they hire him. I mean, he's got the experience. He's worked, with the guys at Tampa Bay, Tennessee. I like it. I think it's a good hire. I don't think it's a splashy one. I know some people are hoping for splashy names, and I'm interested to know where Hafley kind of came up with that idea. I know they have a connection with Schiano and work together, and I know that's a big thing. And he has NFL experience, which is another big piece that Hafley has. But it'll be interesting to see how he envisions that offense. I'm assuming it's going to stick with a pro style, given that that's kind of what Notre Dame has run at different times. But we'll have to see how he adjusts because every coaching staff is different. So that's it for today. This is AJ Black. Hopefully I'll be back tomorrow with a much more improved voice. And thank you all for listening today. If you were in the Northeast, I hope you were all safe after that blizzard. I was out shoveling and snow blowing for 2 hours today. Not the most fun thing in the world, but you got to do it, right? Have a great one, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care, everyone.